Skyler, it's great to see you again. Really appreciate the time. And, we got connected recently because we actually exchanged some notes after a post where I was just kind of looking for great sellers, great sales leaders, and just champions of selling. And we connected on, one of those threads. And that we talked about in one of our first conversations was really, how do you start and build success in a new role? I think a lot of times it's very daunting. I know I've started roles in my career where no matter what I had done prior, that new role was very overwhelming. I'm one of those people, I want to know how to do everything immediately, and it just doesn't work that way. So I know you've been in a few different roles in your career. You found success. What is that blueprint? I'd love to have you share with the audience. How do you start and build success in a new role?
Of course, Carson, my man, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to dive in on a few tips. I mean, first off, I think I love your channel just because you're focused on the best practices, the digestibles that people can walk away from. So hopefully I got a few in store. When it comes to starting off in a new role, I think you said something first. I think drop the notion that you're going to be able to pick up everything right away. I mean, at least for me, when I first started off in a role, it's like, oh, I want to be able to hit my monthly metric in 2 weeks. Well, it's probably not going to happen in your first month. Those little things of beating yourself up, I think you drop by the wayside, as you probably did when you first started. Sales is tough. But from a success standpoint, I think one piece of advice that I got early on at Salesforce, a little background on me. I'm a BDR at Salesforce now, a business development representative. I've been at Salesforce for almost a year and a half now. So it's flying by. Fresh out of college is when I first joined. But really as a BDR, you're setting meetings for account executives to hopefully qualify opportunities. And I think one thing that you want to always think of when you're first starting off is what I'm doing a meeting setting activity. Carson, when we first connected, I think it was like the notion that you start and you get all these amazing resources from the company that you join. It's a little overwhelming. You're drowning in talk tracks and email templates and reports of people who maybe clicked into a marketing, webinar of yours 2 years ago of Microsoft's, latest and greatest. But I think you constantly have to ask yourself, number one, is what I'm doing a meeting setting activity. Are you on the phones? That's a meeting setting activity. You're cold calling, you're prospecting, sending a few emails. That I think is number one. If you're doing that, if you're on the phones, you are in the right direction. So I think a lot of people just get kind of drowned in their resources. That's kind of the first thing. And I think the second thing that maybe goes against what people are hearing is the idea that you need to sell. I think so much of the best salespeople are just the best listeners, the people that are like the most curious. If you're talking the whole time, you're probably not in the best place. If you're on the phone with someone and you've been pitching them, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be the greatest meeting you'll ever set in my world, or the deal that you're going to close. So those are two things I think. Starting off 2 weeks in the role, you're just hitting the phones. All right, am I on the phones? That's a meeting setting activity. Am I talking too much? Am I staying curious? Am I asking, open-ended questions? If you're doing those two things, you should be just fine for those first couple of weeks. If you would, what would you say to some of that?
Yeah, it's interesting because look, first off, I think both you and any leadership has to acknowledge a fact, and that's that you've earned the right to be in the role. And that your style is going to look different, right? Like I'm a sales leader. I don't expect, nor do I want anyone that joins my team to do things exactly the way that I do them. What's the value add in that? First off, look, if you're starting a new sales role, you've got to know the playing field and you've got to know the players before anything else. There are things that you can do that will, to your point, is this a conversation driving behavior? There are things that are going to create value that are going to be a value add for your activities. And then there's things that are not. You've got to know the playing field. You've also got to know the players. What are the relationships and resources that are going to be the most important in role? So figuring that out first, setting the right foundation is key. Every new year, I always spend a lot of time building the foundation for success. If we get new territories, we get new people, get new resources, whatever it is, I spend a lot of time mapping that out because before you feast, you got to set the table. And so you've got to understand, what are the key tools in the tool set? Who do I need on my team internally? What relationships do I need with my customers? And then, to your point, focus on one step, the step in front of you. I've got to get the conversations first. And the other thing I'll add, some people get false success. Some people I've seen, they come out of the gates, they're firing, they don't know what they're doing, but they might get a few deals under their belt. They don't know the holistic process. They don't have the polish yet, but they get some false success and they start to think, oh, well, this is easy. This is a slam dunk. And then they shut down the learning and the listening. And that's a bad thing to have happen early on in the game. The other thing, some people take a long time to ramp, and that's okay, because I sometimes think that if it takes a while, if you've really got to earn it and you're learning all along and you get that momentum, that actually makes you a better long-term bet. I've seen those folks go on to be great sellers, great leaders. You got to figure out your own style. It's not going to look like everyone else's, but you are going to assimilate best and better practices over time.
You bring up a great point. It's finding that process. Like, hey, this has to be repeatable. You can't go in every day, just going by the hip, trying to figure out, who am I calling today? What's kind of like the play that I'm focused on? Maybe there's something industry specific. If you have a plan in place, a process, like you said, you spend before a territory change, you're understanding who the key players are. That's so crucial. I'll touch on one thing that you said, the 1% better each day. That is, like, I think not only is that good for the tangibles, but I think the personal, the mindset part of it, which I think so much is of sales, is how you take it internally. Is if you're making 50 calls, you don't set any meetings, but you got someone else on your dashboard who's maybe had 10 calls and set 5 meetings, it's going to take different paths to get there, but one step in front of another, 1% better. I think the more detailed you can come in that process, but have it be repeatable, and have it not be getting lost in the resources, drowning in the talk tracks. I'm onboarding someone now and I just say, hey, just find a couple of good questions that you can get out in 10 to 15 seconds on the phone and say it over and over again until you connect with the right person. So I completely agree with you, Carson. I think that repeatable process, don't beat yourself up. Know you got a game plan. That game plan can win. That has found success. And I think one thing you mentioned, where we talked about before, is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel of BDR. There's been thousands of business development representatives across not just software companies, but all over. They found a way to successfully do it. You can follow it, you can duplicate it, or you can throw in your own little touches. But find your top performer. Go on your, we have Microsoft Salesforce. We've got our pretty dashboards. It's very easy to see who's at the top. And just get really intentional with how you want to shadow some of these people. Hey, like, I wouldn't send the message saying, hey, I just want to pick your brain for 15 minutes. No, like, be really specific. Like, hey, I see you set a lot of meetings. Can we go through some of the ways you pick out the contacts that you select? Is it based off a title? So it really just goes back to that process. Like, if you got a game plan, you've shadowed the best, and you're just trying to get 1% better each day, you're going to be just fine.
I love that so much. I've made an entire career off being resourceful and trying to emulate the best. You're developing muscle at this stage. You've got to control the controllables. And what you can control at the onset is what we've been talking about, understanding the resources at your disposal, understanding those key relationships that you're going to need both in and out of your company, with your prospect, with your target customer. And you've got to make sure that you're continuing to seek out, like, those colleague and those aspirational mentors. Those are really of value, because that is going to inform the decisions you make as you're developing that muscle to be better. One of the most important things you're going to do in these stages too is really figure out, what are you passionate about? You're going to gravitate towards certain elements of the role. What are your strengths? What are your unique superpowers? And then one of the things I know you're passionate about, Skyler, is being a multiplier and really developing that brand. What do you want to be known for? How do you figure out, the best way that you're going to deliver wins to other people? One of the biggest things that I spend time in my role is working with my team to help people define what is the impact that they're having, and not just on the day to day right in front of them, but broader in the organization. As we lead senior leaders, senior sellers, how are they having broad impact? These are the types of things that get them noticed for raises, promotions, leadership roles, all the things you want to build into. So how would you guide our audience to be thinking about becoming a brand and being a multiplier?
Yeah, I love that question. Okay, well, I'll start with, my kind of brand, the reputation. That's kind of how I like to call it, that I built myself at Salesforce. And honestly, I'll start with, when you are building that brand, make sure it's authentic to yourself. You're not going to be able to constantly, day by day, come out, I want to be a multiplier. For me, multiplier means you're multiplying other people's success. You come to work, you're not only working for your team, but you're a part of a greater good. Okay, I got a buddy who's struggling over here. How can I multiply them to get to the next step? It's not only going to make you better, but it's going to make the people around you better. And in my opinion, I don't think there's no better feeling than seeing somebody else succeed because of some of the tips, tricks, maybe even guide. Like, that's, to me, one of the best feelings. So that was what I found out early on. I want to be a motivation, understand what gets people fired up. And to your point, how do you do that? Well, first off, be authentic. What is it that you really are passionate about? And I think the key, and it's really simple, Carson. I think it's finding, I call it like a standout channel. So let's give an example. I'll use myself. I want to be a multiplier. Every Monday at Salesforce, I'll send out a Monday motivation, little snippet of a quote, you name it, send off a little explanation of where I'm seeing passion. Oh, here's a great quote, and here's something that I want to bring about through the week. Okay, so take that, send it out weekly, and then people start to think like, oh, okay, Skyler, there's more to Skyler than just 50 calls a week and 4 meetings. It's someone who cares about, personal development. And through time, you'll realize like, oh, people look at you and they associate you with this brand. And if you stay authentic, you have that standout channel. So for me, my Mondays would be my Monday motivation. So for some people, if you want to, let's say learning and teaching, and you want to get in a position of leadership, I feel like you hear that all the time from people starting in sales. Like, I want to be a leader. Okay, well, what are you doing for your brand, not just on the dash, but off the dash to get there? Oh, I hold Friday, study sessions. We're going through prospective accounts that maybe some of our new logo friends can't break into. Okay, well, that makes you a team. If you're doing that weekly, bi-weekly for your team, that's definitely your brand. That's definitely your, something that encompasses you, not just in work, but probably in life. So to your team, to people, Carson, I think it's just, figure out what's your why. What are you doing this for? What gets you motivated? Sales probably isn't fun 5 days a week, 365 days a year. So what's getting you out of bed? And, and if you found that something, find the standout channel that you can really you can shine, because it's, gosh, how many amazing employees are there at these companies? The world's so talented with standouts all over the place. So you got to know your area, your avenue to be shown. And I think if you just make it authentic and something that you really feel passionate about, well, gosh, it's made for you. So that's easy.
It's brilliant. I think we got to ask ourselves, how can we best become indispensable? How do we, as part of the dynamic team, how do we make 1 + 1 + 1 10 by adding to each other's strengths and superpowers and finding ways to deliver wins for everybody in the room, customer, colleagues alike? Gone is the day of the lone wolf salesperson, and titles don't define leadership. I think that's really at the heart of what you were expounding upon. You can lead from every seat. Anybody, no matter what you're doing, you can conduct these best practice sharing sessions. You can create community around what you're doing. And these are the types of things that help you become multiplier. My career exponentially went to the next level when I realized the value of real, true enterprise selling, working as part of a dynamic team, and how I could fill the right role. And it's okay to not know your brand or how you're going to be a multiplier immediately. Some of these things, don't pressure yourself into thinking about what that is right out of the gate. Something may pop up 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years in, that you can really gravitate toward and sink your teeth into. as you find something and you develop that muscle and you get really good at it, those are the types of things that you double down on and that you look for ways to help other people get better at. I look at it kind of like the Avengers or the Justice League, whichever, pick your favorite.
Avengers guy. Avengers guy over here.
There you go. I'm more of a DC Comics growing
Okay.
up, but
We can get
frankly,
into that.
Marvel makes better movies now. Like each one of them, what's beauty is when they're working in perfect harmony, every one of them is drastically different. Some of them are human, some of them have superpowers. All of those superpowers are very different. But guess what? When they're working in harmony and in perfect unison, that's what really makes it work. And that's what makes for a great team. And so I think that's where you have to ask yourself, as a multiplier, as a brand, how do I enhance everybody around me? And what can I glean from others? And how can I amplify how great they are so we can all lift everybody up? It doesn't take food off the table for me to help you or you to help me. And that's the beauty of all of these things. I think that's where my career really took it to the next level, was when I realized I don't need to hoard my trade secrets. Like, let's all share freely and go out and all get better.
I think too, how good does it feel? I just touched back on that. I mean, you just know that you're making a really tangible impact, even if it's not just based off the numbers, just someone saying, hey, you made work easier. I'm not logging in at 7:45 stressed. It's like, okay, well, that's a win. That feels good. And I think one thing we touched about, Carson, was, you'll probably reach a plateau of learning, at some point. And when you switch into like, all right, well, I can learn by teaching. Like, okay, I've done, I've really hit a point of like, I know how to work within the software. I know how to make call. I speak from this BDR head, so excuse me, but I know how to set meetings. I know how to get qualified pipeline. Okay, well, to really master that now, you can switch into this teacher mode or, multiplier. And it's like, you'll see a major difference in like, oh, I thought I really knew what I was doing. But then when you try to teach it to someone else, you're like, now I'm really starting to get it. I can really see how to condense this and make it easier for someone else to understand, which in turn makes it very quick and goes back to that just process. You're like, okay, I'm really firing on all cylinders here because I know what I'm doing. I can teach it. So I love that, and why it really resonates in your channel. It's these best practices. Like, I remember when I first started my job, I wasn't excited was very nervous to pick up the phone. So to have something like this where you can just hear someone, just share a couple of tidbits, gosh, it doesn't get any better. So I think it's a great place to just keep sharing, and it's only going to help you personally as well. So you got to just think about it from that perspective too.
Couldn't have said it better. The reward of teaching and adding value for others is extremely fulfilling and enriching, and frankly, it opens up very genuine relationships that you may have for the balance of your life. You just never know where it can go. I've read some really good quotes that I would botch if I tried to recite them, but really at the heart of them is the merit of, there is a peak that you can reach from a personal, individual performance perspective. Those especially from an athlete perspective. I mean, your days are numbered from an athletic perspective. Your days are numbered from maybe a top sales performance perspective. But the value that you can add when you pay it forward and you invest and instill greatness in the future generation of whatever it is that you do and whatever it is that you're passionate about, that's where you can leave a legacy.
It's not just sales. If we're all, if everyone was just a little bit more committed to being a multiplier or, just about other people's success, we'd all be pretty successful.
That's it. Be a multiplier. Skyler, this has been amazing. Anything else that you'd love to touch on before we sign off today?
I had such a blast. I think the one thing that I was constantly thinking about when we were having these conversations is that teaching standpoint. I mean, it's just so fun to have an opportunity to share, and looking forward to, other topics that we can pick up. And if people are, ever wondering how to get into a BDR path or have questions, LinkedIn's a great spot. That's how we got connected. So always got an open inbox and love these conversations. So really happy we did this.
Amazing. And I think too, Skyler, if we look back over our career, we'd be remiss not to point out where we benefited from great teachers, from great relationships.
Amen.
Challenge yourself to be that for somebody else.
I love that, and we'll be in a good spot if we do. A bunch of teachers out there, that's a good place to be.
I love it. So let's go out and be multipliers. Thank you for being on today, Skyler. Great to see you, and we'll see you next time.
Of course, we'll see you next time, my man. Thank you.
Take care.